I want to spend a little more time on what causes a story to be stuck. As a writer, one of the worst things that can happen is your story gets stuck. It's like a basketball player who breaks a leg. I mean, you can show up for the game, but you can't do much if you can't play. And as a writer, you can't do much if you're stuck. But I believe a big reason is as our world shrinks, our story starts to shrink. And by that I mean, as we start living a smaller and smaller story, perhaps to control things, perhaps to try to make life more functionable, but as we shrink our story that we're living in, we oftentimes inadvertently shrink the idea we have or the story we have that we're telling. Another way to say this is an unexamined life leads to smaller stories. If I were to ask you, if we were to sit over coffee and just be talking, and I said, hey, I want to know, how is your heart doing right now? And you would give me a deer in the headlights look, or not know. Not that you don't want to answer, you just don't even know how to answer that. Or if I said, man, it's been a long time, you've been working so hard. If you had a day off, what would bring you joy? And if you just said, gosh, I'm sure. I haven't even thought about that in so long. Just a day for me. There are ways, as storytellers, we need to dive deeper into our story through living an examined life. If we don't know the beats of our own story, it's hard for people to trust us as a storyteller. This is a quote from my book, The Story of Wit. Every hero's journey, including yours, reaches a moment where we either cling to the known or move into mystery. In that cycle of the hero's journey, at about 3 o'clock, it's moving into the unknown. That's the part that most people avoid. That's the part we don't want to do necessarily because it's not comfortable and there's no guarantees. But when we're watching a movie, like say an Indiana Jones movie, well, remember that scene in the first one where he's on the bridge in the middle and a guy comes on either end wielding these huge swords. And he's on a rope bridge over a mountain, and it's a huge distance if he falls. Well, when that happens as a moviegoer, we lean in. We know the story's getting really good. We don't know how it's going to be resolved, but it's a really good moment. But Indiana Jones probably isn't thinking that's a really good moment. He's wondering if he's going to survive. But if we can start to see our own story when we're on the rope bridge as a really good story, things start to shift. I'm not saying it's courting danger, but I'm saying if we see our story as entering into the unknown actually makes me a better, stronger person because I will change on the journey. That's gold right there for our own story. Because which has more risk and danger, clinging to the known or moving into mystery? Well, it seems like if we stay in the known, there's less risk and less danger. But it's actually more danger to stay in a stagnant place in your life. Because if you stay in a stagnant place, then your world shrinks, your ideas shrink. I often say you can't tell a better story than you're living. You can't, no matter how creative you are, the limitations on your protagonist, the greatest threat, if you're writing fiction, to your protagonist isn't the villain, the antagonist, it's you, the creator. Because your characters can't transcend what you've lived or not lived. You can put them in places you've never been. You can be creative and imaginative in creating new worlds. Yes, you can do those things. But can a character have greater faith than you've had, or understand God more than you do, or understand love more than you do? I don't think so, because you run out of words. So, clinging to the known is actually a far more risky way to live, and a far less powerful way to live as a storyteller. I'm going to read to you this quote from the book. Ultimately, what you create is an outer expression of your inner journey. When the internal journey of discovery stops, the creative process withers. So dive wholeheartedly into the unknown. Being in over your head is God's way of taking you and your creativity to deeper places. You know, the shallow end of a pool, if you go to like, a country club or the YMCA or somewhere that has a swimming pool, the shallow end doesn't have much risk, doesn't have much danger. You're in ankle deep water. You're not going to drown. But you probably will notice the water is warm and yellow because it's pee-filled from all the little kids. And so there's not much risk, but there's not much joy, and there's not a place you really want to be. And it's not going to refresh you. You want to be in water that gets you over your head, that's living water, that's deep, that's dangerous, that's wild. And that's what happens when God takes us into deeper places. So like I said, your protagonist's biggest problem, it's you, it's me. Any story we write, we are the limiter of what's possible in that story. But as we breathe life into new worlds, then our characters start to possess our DNA. As we stretch, our characters can stretch. As we stretch, our imagination grows. What we're writing becomes larger. Here's a thought that's really important. What's created in our strength holds our weaknesses. When we rely on our own strength, when we create alone with our gifting, our talent, but it's up to us and we're going to make this happen. When we start doing that, we have to realize that book, that manuscript, that creation may have our strength, but if it's only us doing it, then it's filled with our weaknesses too. It's filled with our blind spots. In a mythic sense, where you haven't gone, your creations will stumble. It won't feel real. It won't seem right. I have a good friend who is now in his 50s, but he never had children. He's married, no kids, great guy. But when I talk to him about children, I can just tell there's this massive disconnect. And so I'll say something like, when my kid did this when he was 3, it was so cool. There was this moment when he was 3 when he said this. And rather than being able to step into it, he'll say something like, I remember when I was 3. And I'm like, I'm not talking about when you were 3. I'm talking about a father's love of a son, not, when you were 3. And when we haven't experienced something, even if we're creative, it's hard to go there. There's this great quote. It's going to be 3 screens if you want to write this. But it's by an author named Billy Coffey. And listen to this quote. There is a learning curve to writing that often goes overlooked. And that is the experience of living, of plunging headlong into life and daring to swim in both the clear and the murky waters. And then using pen and paper as a towel to dry yourself off. Wow, that's a powerful quote. I'll take us back to it. There's a learning curve to writing that often goes overlooked. We miss it most of the time. And it's the experience of living, of actually plunging headlong, dangerous, risky, yes, into life and daring to swim in clear and murky waters, and then using your gifting, your pen and paper, as a towel to dry yourself off. A lot of times writers will talk about they want this cozy place to write with a cup of mocha and this armchair and, I get it, kind of, but I'd rather them go out and do something a little dangerous, stretch themselves, come in from an experience where you weren't in control. Come in from an experience where you'd never eaten at that restaurant or visited that place or spoken to that person about this topic. Risk something and then invite me there as a reader. Richard Newbar has a quote that says, "Pilgrims are poets who create by taking journeys." I love that quote. Pilgrims, explorers, are poets who create by taking journeys. What is the journey that you're taking through the creation that you're making right now? What journey are you having to take? Where are you having to stretch for what you're creating right now? Because the best journey to invite readers into is actually the one you're on. I've had a lot of writers say, yeah, I want to write this book one day, but I need to wait until I've got all the answers. I've kind of gotten to the end of my journey. And I'll tell them a lot of times that the best journey you can invite a reader on is the one you're in. The one that doesn't have the answer already figured out. The one that isn't already on the back end and you're safe and you're home. But the one that you're in going, I don't know if I'm going to make this next part of the mountain. I don't know how I'm going to get to this next shore. I'm in it. I'm a few steps ahead of the reader, hopefully. But it's not about having all the answers. It's about saying, come with me and explore this topic. So the question is, do you know the journey you're on right now? You know, we talked about an examine life. This is an examine life question. Do you know the journey you're on right now? What was the journey you just finished a few months ago, or that you completed a new stage of? What's the journey you're fearful to take? What's the journey you feel God nudging you into? So here's some questions for you to write down. Who is your sage right now? Who is your Gandalf figure? Who is your Obi-Wan Kenobi? What threshold have you recently crossed? What's the last time you've gone through a mythic death and rebirth? Where have you been reborn? What have you died to? Those are the kind of activities that when they fuel the story you're writing and living, make you a writer that people want to come alongside. Now, I'm going to give you a handful of questions or thoughts that will help you on your writer's journey. First off, examine your life as much as you study the beats of your novel or your story or your manuscript. You need to know yourself. Sometimes we know characters in TV series better than we know ourselves. Like we can talk for hours on the motive and the heart and the, development of a character in a Star Wars movie, and we don't even know where we're at in our story. We don't know why we tear up at certain songs or movies. We don't know why we lean into other things. We don't know why we avoid certain conversations. We don't know why we fear certain things. That's part of examining your life as a storyteller. Here's another big one. Ask God what he thinks of your writing. And then listen, don't try to answer for him. But ask God, what do you think of my writing? What do you think of this story? What do you think of this idea? Remember the co-creation process. It's like that scene from August Rush where they're playing the guitars together. Engage with God on your ideas. It's a playground of the imagination you get to be with him on. God, what do you think of this scene? Is this cool? I'm thinking about taking my ideas here. What does this make you happy? Does this excite you? It's engaging with the Creator. Some questions along that are, God, what is my effect on others? Why do I have the fears I have? It's asking God about what you're creating, but also about just your life. Number 3, what do you struggle with and how are you fighting for freedom in this area? In all of our lives right now, that should be top of mind. Not some mysterious thing you need an hour to think of. What is it in your life? It's like if you're watching a movie and you pause the movie at maybe 30% through, and we said, what's the protagonist struggling with? We'd all go, oh, Jason Bourne is struggling against this, and he's trying to find this, or in this TV series, they're trying to win the state championship football game, but they're afraid that this. Well, okay, what are you struggling with in your story right now? And not just what, but how are you fighting for freedom? 4, give your heart more attention than plot twist or than the next idea or the next proposal that you're writing. How is your heart doing at this stage of your life in this season? Above all else, we're told to nurture it and guard our heart. So how's it doing? I just put this in here because this is something I wish authors did less of. Do you measure more the up and downs of your heart or your daily word count? A lot of writers are hyper-focused, in my opinion, on daily word count. But the problem with that is nobody really cares how many words you write. They care about where the words take them. So it's the equivalent of if I told you, hey, I just got back from a vacation in Hawaii. And you said, well, how was the vacation? And I said, well, I'll tell you. Each day I took 5,000 steps. There you go. Is that good or bad? Is it who knows? What was I running in circles, or was I word count isn't a valid measure for your creativity. It's a productivity output measure, but it doesn't measure the quality of what's being done. Or it doesn't, if God tells you to get up on a certain day when you're creating and go walk around the block and you get 0 words done, was that a more productive or less productive day than when you wrote 3,000 words? I'll take this day. But the word count doesn't measure that. So it's a way to see your journey in different ways. The 5th question, who or what have you given power to validate or invalidate you? Because with your creativity especially, the people and the things you give power to validate, you're giving the power to invalidate at the same time. And that's why I said if your identity is your foundation, nobody can take away being a son or daughter of God. Here's just a question within that. Are the risks you take primarily on the page? I've known some really brave writers who are really frightened livers of their life. They talk a good story on the page. They don't live nearly as risky or costly of a life. So ask yourself that. The goal is to risk more off the page and then use the page as a canvas for who you are. In the creative process, do you see God as distant or intimate? So I had this great conversation at the last writers conference I was at with a person, and they said, Alan, you talk a lot about God being a co-creator. You're co-creating with God, and it's a co-creative process. But they saw it more as a sub-creative process. And so God, it's not a dance, it's God's here and we're here. And I was like, absolutely, in the sense of who's the alpha? Of course God is the alpha. But miraculously, God wants to step into creation with us and co-create. And so I asked this person, how do you describe how you create? And she said, well, God's up here, I'm here, God gives me a gift, and then I do something and I hand it back and hope he likes it. That's not that is sub-creating. And it's also not active and intimate with God. It's not a dance. So what I'm saying to you is, yes, of course God is alpha, but then God says, let's dance. And then it's together. And then it's intimate and active, and it's playing a song together. It's coming up with ideas together. And so it's a co-creation process. But if you see God as distant, that's really hard to enter into. If you're trying to dance with somebody who's in Nebraska right now, it's going to be really hard to do that slow dance. But it's not if they're together with you in the room. Here's another suggestion. Live more before you write more. Because your characters, your ideas, your creativity, it's not just having that grow in a book, it's you growing and stretching in your story. I'm writing an allegory right now, a second allegory, and in the allegory, I'm on my 3rd draft. And man, it's taken longer than I want. And at the same time, I know I'm having to stretch more and grow more to write more. I need to change before I can change the manuscript fully. And the problem is this is allegories on chaos. So I'm having to live in a lot more chaos than I want and spend more time in chaos to try to navigate through it. But what I'm learning in that, with scar tissue and with some bumps on the head, is how to tell a story that's more true and that's going to help more people. But it requires living more before writing more. And then 7, dream big your dreams. Like, if your dream is something that you can attain whether God shows up or not, it's way too small of a dream. If what your writing goals are can happen if God never entered the room, way too small. Way too small. Dream the kind of dreams that are only achievable with Him. Explore more, risk more, ask more questions, live more, and then through your writing, through your creativity, and then invite us into that. Whatever it is you're doing, speaking, writing, whatever form of creativity, stretch more, ask more, listen, learn more, risk more, and then say, hey, come with me on this journey. That's the hero's journey people want to come with you on. This is what you're going through. This is what you're struggling with. This is what you're wondering about. I'll go with you on that. That's what the reader wants to hear, and they're in. This artist journey of discovery I'm talking about is one that I believe will transform your art and your heart, and it will make your story come alive. But first, it starts with us. We have to know where we are on the journey. We have to know who our sage is. We have to know what we're risking. We have to know about our own death and rebirth. We have to know when we're going from the known to the unknown. We have to be comfortable with unknown and mystery. And then we come out the other side changed. And then we get to do it again. So that's the journey I want to invite you on. And it's a journey that will rock your creativity in all the right ways. Thanks.